Well, if we don't pass aid for Ukraine, then I think Ukraine has a very difficult time preserving their geographic integrity and life. You're going to have a lot of people who lose their life as Russia runs across Ukraine. And that will make it very clear to people around the world that you really can't trust America's word, because we made a commitment in 1994 to respect the sovereignty of Ukraine, to help defend the people of Ukraine if they were attacked. And that's what's happening. And if we walk away from that, they won't trust our word. Europe will say, hey, the United States is not with us. We're not going to be with them if there's something they want to do in the Pacific, for instance. Let them deal with China. Let America deal with China and the issues there. So we're strong globally, in part because of our friends. We have alliances. We always talk about how the Russians and the Chinese don't have the kinds of friends we have. Well, we have friends in part because we stand together. And if we don't stand with our friends, we will lose strength, and that will ultimately come to hurt us. It's important to the people in Taiwan, to the people in Japan, to the people in India, to the people in Europe. I mean, all these people are watching to see, can you count on America? Or is America so isolationist, it doesn't care what happens to the rest of us? If that's the case, by the way, if we cede leadership, if we're no longer the leader of the free world, if we're no longer the arsenal of democracy, then the world is going to look for different leaders. And I know at least one player that's happy to step into that role, and that's China. And a world where Xi Jinping is the leader of the world is a very dangerous world, and not good for America, not good for our businesses, for our economy, but certainly not good for our freedom.
Good morning and welcome to the channel. I'm Brian Lusk. Thanks for joining me today. That was Mitt Romney. Now, let me tell you something about Mitt Romney and something I've discovered about myself in recent days. And that is that I can disagree with people on some things and agree with them on others. And when it comes down to it, Mitt Romney nailed it out of the park when it came to foreign policy. He had some domestic policies I wasn't fond of, but his foreign policy was dead on target. And I think that's being borne out as we're seeing what's happening in the world today. So that's the reason why I decided to share that as the introductory video today. By the way, Lucille, thanks for joining me today. Glad to have you here. And for anybody else who's joining me as we speak, please go ahead and chime in. Let me know you're here and absolutely comment during the stream. We got quite a few things going on today, though not as much as some other days, so I'm not going to complain too much. Let's go ahead and get into the kind of the most important things right off the bat. Hi, Jerry. Glad to have you here. And we're going to start off with the breakaway region of Transnistria from Moldova. They did hold their big 7th Congress over there, and this is a pretty rare thing that they do. They don't actually hold these congresses very often. And they basically set up they set up the reason for Russia to potentially get involved. They're talking about being suppressed economically by Moldova, that there's been this increase in taxes and levies and things like that on things that would be going into Moldova. Then they said, basically, Russia, help us out. Help us to take care of this problem. Help us to intercede on our behalf. Now, Transnistria is anything but an independent location there. They absolutely have been asking for Russian assistance. They would love to join up with Russia themselves. I don't know that that's necessarily true of the population as a whole. I just don't know about Transnistria. I do know that about 2,000 Russian troops are there. And if they decided to cause some trouble at the back end on the west side of Ukraine, I don't think those 2,000 troops have enough materiel or effective combat power to make a big difference. That said, it's one more area where Ukraine would have to dedicate resources. And I think people kind of miss one aspect of the situation in Moldova and Transnistria itself. Vladimir Putin, when he set up the whole breakaway region of Transnistria to try and start this thing off, he is relying on Western lack of will, Western inability to overcome their inertia out of being at a state of war. Because look at it. It's about 1,800 to 2,000 troops, a very small, narrow sliver of land that would be easy for an organized and effective fighting force to kick those 2,000 troops out of and recapture that territory. But Western nations, Western powers, have an automatic bias against going to war. So they're willing to go along to get along a lot more than, say, Russia is. Russia, who invaded Chechnya. Then when they got beaten, they waited a few years, rebuilt, and then went in and slaughtered the place. Then the same Russia that went into Georgia, captured several territories there, split the nation because of these breakaway regions that Russia supported. And now they're in Ukraine because they know that Transnistria wasn't stopped. Georgia wasn't stopped. Chechnya wasn't stopped. And each time Western nations said, well, it's not really our problem. They're not really our people. They're not really our problem. And yet, as we are able to see, every time we don't address a problem head on, we end up with a bigger problem down the road. Kind of like not addressing the foundational issues of your house when they're initial and small. Eventually they become big and destructive and potentially the destruction of the whole property. All right, so let's continue on. I've editorialized enough. The Russian media says that Moscow is considering Transnistria's protection appeal and that they may consider additional attention to the location. There's a lot of aspects that might happen if Transnistria actually joined Russia. That would complicate the whole situation vastly more than it currently does, and certainly would be against international law. The question is, would anybody do anything about it? But in the end, Transnistria did not ask to join Russia. They only asked for help in connection to this economic blockade that they claim is happening. Sorry, apparently some of my tabs have refreshed since I put them up here. The overall situation, though, is that there was an appeal to the Secretary General of the UN, the CIS, which I think is the Confederation of Independent States, the European Parliament, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or OSCE, and Russia to kind of get together and dialogue on this whole situation. When pretty much in any of those types of situations, Russia seems to kind of run the board. They come prepared, whereas the Western nations don't. So that's the situation in Moldova and Transnistria right now, just adding one more complication to the overall situation in the battlefield. The next major news comes from the tiny, well, not tiny, but long but thin Tendra Spit. Let's go ahead and zoom in. You'll see here we're going to be in this area right here. So I'm going to zoom in so you can see what we're talking about here. This geological feature right here, and I'm going to just kind of outline it real fast here. This is literally a long, narrow spit of land. It's got a lighthouse on it, but not much else. But it's right off the coast of occupied Kherson and easy striking distance of Crimea itself. This is the area that Ukrainian forces attempted a landing just last night. Well, night before last at this point. The reports are pretty mixed right now as to exactly what happened. The Ukrainians have one story, the Russians have another. And I'm using BBC Russian as my source for today. Russia says that there was a group of boats that approached the Tendra Spit and attempted to land there, that they saw them coming, they shot at them and sank 4 boats, with a 5th managing to get away. That said, they've only provided video evidence of a single boat that, in fact, did make it to land. They state they have a captured Special Forces soldier who was wounded during that operation that they captured and brought in for questioning. and I have some information on that as well in just a moment. And they do not have any additional information as to exactly why this happened. They claim 25 Ukrainian military personnel were lost. It is definitely clear that at least several were lost. Ukraine, on the other hand, says that they managed to land on the Spit, they carried out their operation, and then arranged a departure of their forces. Then during that part, the departure, they came under fire and ended up losing some soldiers in the operation. There's not a whole lot on this Spit other than a lighthouse, but its strategic options would be greatly broadened if Ukraine can actually set up a permanent presence there. That said, there's not much there. If they do, it's going to be a tenuous situation to be in for Ukraine. It's already a tenuous situation for Russia. The only reason it's in Russian hands is because it's hard to resupply, and certainly a difficult situation to be in. The understanding is that the Ukrainians were going to the lighthouse for some reason, and it could be that the Russians have some equipment there that they may be using. I don't know. I can only speculate as to the whys. The captured soldier by the name of Evgeny Gorin was the surviving participant of this landing that they captured. They claim that there were 7 people in each of these boats, and they didn't line up in the proper time. And so when they came under fire, they went for a retreat. But again, the Russians claim they were shot from shore. But this just only confirms that their actual target was the lighthouse itself for unknown reasons. So that's what happened on the Tendra Spit overnight, the last night before last, actually. Obviously a rough situation, no matter how you look at it. Depending on which version you believe, it becomes rougher or less rough. Either way, that's what's going on. Let's go ahead and move into the news out of Ukraine itself. Ukraine is continuing to work on rooting out corruption in their country, which after decades of Russian rule, and then, of course, a couple of decades of basically following Russian patterns, people there have been in the mindset of corruption. So they have now charged the former chair of the Ukrainian Railways, Yevhen Kravtsov, with an embezzlement case of 11.4 million hryvnias, or around $300,000. They have now captured the individual, and they're working on charges in relation to that situation. They're working on getting rid of corruption in their country. Now, this BBC Russian article talks about Ukraine's ability to shoot down 13 Russian planes in February alone. And I did a quick scan of this article. Rather than read it through, I'm going to just go ahead and post the link and see if I can give you a quick summary here while I'm doing so. This is the link to it. It's in Russian, so you'll need to use Google Translate or something like that to read it. And there's a lot of theorizing going on within here. They do theorize that Patriot or NASAM systems have been moved closer to the front, and they are the ones that are being used for this. However, Ukrainian intelligence says that they've been using S-200, modified S-200 missiles. So either way, it's still a riskier situation for Russian aircraft at the front, a situation that they have not been able to fully address as of yet. Therefore, Russia's only defense at this point in time is to push Ukraine further back and farther away in order to prevent them from hitting any of their vital assets. But they're combat assets. They're going to have to get close in order to be able to be effective on the battlefield. Or as Yuri Ignat, a spokesman for the Ukrainian Air Force, said, Ukraine has a weapon that can reach Russian planes at a long distance. That's the reason why they're able to destroy 13 planes in less than 2 weeks. And this is their graphic that kind of shows all the planes that were destroyed in that time frame. There is some debate on the Russian side about exactly how many of these were actually lost, or how many of them were just damaged and then brought back home by their respective pilots. Overall, the odds are that even if they manage to get home, they're going to be quite a while out of the fight, and that's where the difference tends to fall in. Of course, they get a little bit of celebratory dancing and to celebrate the downing of these 3 Russian planes that were downed just on the 29th. So they're pretty excited and over the moon about it, so good for them. In related/unrelated news, the F-16 training process continues. They're now doing ground strike and air strike practices in order to be able to be fully prepared for their F-16s. And when they get done, they'll be fully capable on the platform. There's also still going to be some teething period afterwards. I'm certain that if we asked an F-16 pilot, they'd say that it's going to take a bit to get kind of the teething out and get them fully operational in that regard. But even so, every bit of training they get now means that they'll be that much better when it goes to actually using it in combat. From the Institute for the Study of War, Ukrainian officials are pretty concerned about the possibility of significant Russian territorial gains in summer 2024 in the event of continued delays in Western security assistance. That's a pretty valid assessment there. Europe is working on expanding their production of military hardware, a situation that wouldn't be happening if the U.S. was still providing in bulk the type of material. And therefore, it means that Europe's going to become a little bit more self-sufficient in the self-defense front, in the military front, because they're having to step up their own production to cover the gap. This is, in the long run, assuming Ukraine can survive the long run, this would be better for Ukraine as they'd have more options and more availability that's less tied to U.S. feckless politicians. But overall, they are looking at a situation where if Russia continues to get arms from Iran, continues to get arms from North Korea, continues to produce their own arms, and Ukraine is not able to directly counter that with more effective arms, Russia will eventually and gradually gain the upper hand and continue to push Ukraine back. Moving on to the news out of Russia, some people in military uniform broke into the house of a Kherson region resident and kidnapped her husband. Now, this was on the occupied side, so they were in Russian-style camouflage uniforms, literally just came in, smacked the husband, who works for a local internet provider, then put a hat on him and took him out of the house in an unknown direction. This is the type of thing that brutal dictators do. This is clearly not an arrest. It is literally just taking somebody from their home and hauling them off to who knows where for who knows what. There was another HIMARS attack on another gathering of Russian soldiers, this time in Yelenovka. There we go. Sorry about that. Over in Yelenovka, well, they had another general who tried to put together a group of guys so they could do an award ceremony. And, of course, Ukrainians found out and launched a HIMARS at it for 19 personnel killed and 12 more wounded, including the commander of the 155th Marine Brigade, who has been, I might add, the 155th has been pretty active in combat. So it's interesting to see that that's the one that gets targeted. Vladimir Putin gave a big address to the country and the Federal Assembly specifically, talking about the special military operation and saying that the people who come back from the special military operation should be the new elite of Russia, and they should be entrusted with its future. And this is there's a lot of crimes that are being tried from those who are returning from the special military operation. They're sending prisoners there, and they're bringing prisoners back. Also, the rest of the military is going to end up being, pretty well beat down from this. But that's who Vladimir Putin believes should be their new elite. There should be no elite, but that's just my position on that. A Coast Guard boat of the Border Service of the FSB, of the Russian Federation, ended up on fire on the Sea of Azov. They actually had to call for rescue. Apparently, the wheelhouse of the boat was entirely destroyed with 5 casualties, and they had to be evacuated. We don't know if that boat was sunk. And I think I've got another one on that, but we'll find out. Yeah, here it is. This is the recording of that radio transmission, but I'm not going to share that. Number one, because it's not in English. Now, this one, if you pay attention, let me see if I can bring this up a bit bigger for you here. There we go. Let's go ahead and hit play on this. This is a Russian Panzer S-1 air defense system making a right turn and over onto its side. Apparently, this was being brought to protect one of Vladimir Putin's houses because it was apparently going to be in use. And as you can see, it did not make it there. So it's going to be a while to repair that one. Apparently, when they designed the Panzer S-1, it was intended to go onto a different chassis. And that chassis was not available, so it ended up being put onto a standard one, ended up being top-heavy, and thus easy to roll over like this. Speaking about Vladimir Putin's speech, there was quite a few interesting little clips and videos and pictures that came out of it. This man looked straight at the camera with exactly this expression on his face for a whopping 5 seconds. And of course, that means that there was that it really went viral for a bit. Like, I can't believe this is what we're hearing. I think I had something else on this. Oh yeah, nope, I don't. I don't right now. Anyway, I thought that was funny, and so I thought that I would just share that along. Vladimir Putin's overall speech included things like calling for more children to be born, and a few other policy position changes. It was effectively a campaign stump speech. Is really what it was, and he, as somebody pointed out, he's been in power for 24 years. Why hasn't he done these things already? As of this morning, a Su-35 allegedly disappeared from radar in the vicinity of Mariupol. No word yet on whether it was actually shot down. Then there's this one other item that's kind of crossed my desk that I've seen some snippets of. Apparently, somebody got their hands on something that's purported to be a leaked version of Russia's policy for using tactical nuclear weapons and, of course, nuclear retaliation. And this document shows an absurdly low threshold before they would actually use these nuclear weapons on the battlefield. But it looks like that was a deliberate leak. It's misinformation being put in the public space, where they're saying that they're trying to say that Vladimir Putin is going to be so willing to use these nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, this is once again the bully problem. If you don't stand up to the bully, he's going to just keep beating you up. And what they're doing here is they're trying to say, we are such a big bully, we will nuke you if you so much as look at us cross-eyed. But in the end, it's a bully. And either they're going to, if they're going to do it, they're going to do it. So it doesn't make any difference what we do. We're just going to need to face down the bully in this case. I'm going to take a brief pause before I go into the international part of this. There's a lot on this international front today, but a lot of it's repeated information. So let's go into this and see what we can see. The situation in Transnistria, which I should have added to my Moldova stuff. Apparently, Zelensky has gotten into that with, I believe it's Moldovan President Sandu, as I recall. So this whole situation is being discussed more. It's a real issue that they're watching. Belgium will contribute 200 million euros to procure 50,000 155 millimeter shells for Ukraine, in coordination with Czechia. More countries are buying in on Czechia's plan to find 155 millimeter shells all across the world and bring them in for Ukraine. So, more are just buying into it. This defense intelligence update talks about Russia's relationship to their former Soviet satellite states. Russia certainly wants to maintain influence in these areas, especially in foreign policy and their domestic security and economic prosperity. But with these countries breaking away from Russia, they're finding this has declined. Their influence has declined. So they're actively investing spies and resources into trying to turn those countries back to Russia. The thing is that Russia's assault on Ukraine has meant that most of those nations are looking at what's going on and saying, I can't trust Russia. If they do that to Ukraine, why wouldn't they do that to me right here on the border? Me, who was part of the Soviet Union for so long. And so they're all kind of trying to buck up their militaries and improve their security relationships to reduce their dependence on Russia. And the Kremlin's ability to carry out their operations there has declined, and they're having to invest more and more resources to be able to pull it off. Ironically, and this is my analysis of the situation over there. Ironically, if Russia had done nothing, they would actually be in a far better position now. They almost had Germany addicted to Russian oil. They almost had the whole of Europe kind of over a barrel. But by going to this active war in Ukraine, they've now lost all of their diplomatic priorities in this area. Sweden and Finland joining NATO. That was absolutely a red line for Russia. And yet it was Vladimir Putin's war that caused them to finally get off the fence and move into the NATO fold. I think there's too little paid attention to in regards to world politics, of the idea that if you want people to be part of your nation and of your thought process, you should be a good partner, a good person on the world stage. You should be nice. Because when you're nice and you have for instance, people want to, we have people coming across the border all the time because they want to come to America to partake in the American dream. There is no Russian dream. Russia is not a nice country in the terms of their attitudes towards freedom. And if they were nice people, good neighbors, well, there wouldn't have been anybody in Ukraine saying, yeah, let's get farther away from Russia. Let's go towards the European Union. And if they were, there would be no assault into Ukraine. In fact, Ukraine may have actually voluntarily gotten closer to Russia's orbit, including several of these Baltic states. Might have, I'm just saying. But Ukraine in particular had up until 2013, when Russia started pushing it, that's when they changed their attitude. And that's when attitudes started to really switch. And this assault into Ukraine has solidified people against Russia in ways that if they just not done it, wouldn't take place. They'd be in far better position to manipulate world events right now if they had. And that's my personal analysis of the situation. Pentagon is looking into tapping the remaining $4 billion in Ukraine Defense Aid Fund. This is the presidential drawdown authority that they can basically tap into to be able to designate certain items as being no longer needed for what they're doing in the U.S. and therefore can be sent to Ukraine. They say they might be able to pull that off. I'm pausing here. Paul says, but Russia built that diplomatic capital so they could spend it on imperialism. Without furthering their imperialism, they would see no point to the diplomacy. Admittedly true, but that's because that's a short-sighted viewpoint. And that is the real issue there, is that the Russians are not looking at this from a long-term perspective, Paul, at least in my viewpoint here. Yes, they want to further their imperialism, but they could have literally had countries asking to join them, to be part of their imperialism, for lack of a better way, if they were actually supportive and helpful and kind and useful to them, as opposed to harsh and punishing and negative. and assaulting and invading neighbors. They were not a reliable partner. In fact, partnering with Russia was the best way to get invaded by Russia. Kind of a situation that the U.S. kind of should be looking into more closely. Again, my opinion. Von der Leyen urges Europe to use the windfall profits of frozen Russian assets to buy weapons for Ukraine. This is all the seized assets that Russia has. They all get interest when they're seized. And so they can use that interest to buy weapons for Ukraine, is what they're saying. They should set that up. Russia has been pushing buttons. And in fact, German and French fighters have had to scramble to intercept Russian military reconnaissance planes near Finland and off Estonia. They're watching. Russia's pushing buttons. They're trying to create as much pressure as they can on the West overall and causing more trouble. They want to just really kind of put pressure on the West. Latvia, now we discussed the other day that Macron kind of said we should consider sending troops to Ukraine. Well, there was then a flood of countries that said, oh, no, we're not sending troops to Ukraine. We're not sending troops to Ukraine. Well, scattered throughout here, you're going to find that there are some that are saying Latvia will consider the possibility of sending troops to Ukraine if a corresponding agreement is reached among NATO allies. Again, the trial balloon was floated by Macron. And of course, nations kind of immediately went, no. But now some are starting to say, well, maybe, that's not a bad idea. President Zelensky gave an address during a press conference with Prime Minister of Albania, Edi Rami, and his statement here it kind of summarizes a lot of what I was saying just a moment ago. If Vladimir Putin survives politically, Russia will exert influence on those countries where it can achieve an immediate successful effect. This means smaller countries will be under threat. The Baltic states, Moldova, everywhere the Soviet Union was present. I also mentioned the other day that Russia was working on a disinformation campaign, kind of coming to a head in the May-June timeframe. But they're constantly working on this, and I wanted to address this one here from Danilov, who was an intelligence guy over in Ukraine. Through disinformation, Russia is trying to sow discord in every European country where elections are taking place. Special units have been set up for this purpose. The thing that I think a lot of us in the West, and particularly in the United States, not necessarily in the Baltic states or parts of Europe, but in the United States in particular, the Russians have been at war with the U.S. for decades now. They never stopped, though even with the fall of the Soviet Union, there was a period where they were in no position to do so. But Russia has always been at war with the West. And it's just that we've been voluntarily ignoring that fact for so long that it's become systemic. And Russia is working on destabilizing every European country and the U.S. everywhere they can, because the more unstable the West is, the easier it is for Russia to carry out their imperialist objectives. Ukraine and Albania have signed a friendship and cooperation agreement. Obviously, they had that press conference over there just recently. This is about trade, economy, science, and technology, culture, education, and healthcare, media, tourism, and sports. So it's not a military thing, but it's showing that Ukraine is very aggressive about working on their foreign contacts to try and keep themselves moving forward, and also to have those relationships for after the war. The Netherlands has ponied up some cash to order up some howitzers from the Czech Republic for Ukraine. So these Dita, I think they are howitzers, are modern and capable units. I believe they've got a 40-kilometer firing range, and as for going from memory on that. But now the Netherlands is saying, okay, we're going to pay for some, send them to Ukraine. That's what's going to happen in order for Ukraine to be able to truly take control of the situation on the battlefield. So people are going to have to pony up the money to get the equipment built and sent to Ukraine. "23 parliaments have sent a letter to U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Mike Johnson, urging him to consider the bill adopted by the Senate, which provides for an allocation of $60 billion for Ukraine. I didn't know we could get 23 countries to agree on anything in the West sometimes. At least not in anything short of direct lethal combat. And even that's going to be controversial. 23 parliaments are encouraging the U.S. to do something. Pretty crazy. The latest round of U.S. sanctions targeting Moscow threatens to disrupt Russian oil sales to India, the largest buyer of Russian seaborne crude oil. And they're seeing a lot of challenges, especially with getting vessels to transport that oil. And it's looking like these sanctions are starting to have a real effect. Paul says, we also need to look at our ignorance and willingness to be Russia's fool with their information. Absolutely true, Paul. That's one of the things that I think that we need to be doing. Any of the information that we're going through, especially online, especially on social media, especially on sources like Twitter and Facebook, and in all these areas, even the mainstream media, we have to sort and filter that information. We got to check it and double check it, and just to make sure, triple check it at times. Otherwise, we'll be easily fooled by Russia and their enormous disinformation campaign. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security has made a decision allowing Ukrainian citizens whose humanitarian parole status in the U.S. expires this year to go for an additional 2 years, up to 2 years, if they obtain a new status. So that'll be useful for those who've had to leave and run away from the war. This post here talks a lot about how Russia has worked on targeting EU nations with their disinformation and influence campaigns. Rather than going through this, I'm going to just post the link here for later reading, but it's good reading and it's long. Otherwise, that's the reason why I'm not going through it. Just understand that Russia has been working aggressively to take over and influence parliaments and politicians all across Europe to try and swing things to their favor. Interesting character over there in Argentina. The new president, Javier Milei, is going to hold a summit of Latin American countries in support of Ukraine. Now, Milei is a nationalist absolutely a nationalist, but he still supports Ukraine in their fight against Russia here and wants Russia out. Considering how vocal he is in everything he does, make no mistake, I expect this means that things will start happening in South America to Ukraine's favor. Ukraine and the Netherlands have signed a bilateral security agreement as well, which provides for 2 billion euros in military assistance for this year and defense assistance over the next 10 years. Good deal between Ukraine and Netherlands. You can make no mistake, when the U.S. went into Iraq, I think it was, Ukraine sent troops. So you can guarantee that if a nation that they work with is having trouble, Ukraine will send support. House Republican Brian Fitzpatrick is preparing a discharge petition to bypass House Speaker Johnson and expedite aid to Ukraine. There are various versions of a discharge petition that could be brought to the floor. They're still debating about which one, but it still will take over a month, regardless of discharge petition type, as that's kind of just how the discharge petition works. Others are calling for a vote on the speaker. Considering how badly that's gone the last several times, I can't imagine that would make things any faster. Estonia, their Prime Minister Kaja Kallas has supported Emmanuel Macron on the possibility of sending ground troops to Ukraine. And she said that they should discuss all possibilities behind closed doors, including what else can be done to help Ukraine. Interesting. Like I said, mentioned before, we kind of see this thread where Macron put up the trial balloon and other nations are starting to pop up and say, we should talk about that. We should definitely talk about that. The trial balloon is up, and I think we're going to start seeing people joining in. Canada has said they'd be open to sending some of their military personnel even. And in this case, there would be not for combat roles, but for training roles far from the front lines. So if even Canada is getting on board, telling you. Paul here is calling for taking out Mike Johnson from the speaker position. I could understand that position, absolutely. So that was several countries, Netherlands, Estonia, and Lithuania, all saying they would be open to the possibility of sending their troops to Ukraine. So just really interesting to see this kind of carried out and happening. Bulgaria, I believe, has finally figured out who's going to pay for the transportation and says their 100 pledged BTR-60s will make it to Ukraine within several days. And France is delivering 100 Delair Dt46 Kamakazi drones to Ukraine by the summer. They've got an order for 2,000 of these for this year. The German Chancellor, of course, Olaf Scholz, has been accused of a flagrant abuse of intelligence. You see, during the conversation about troops on the ground, he spilled that French and British troops may be helping Ukrainians directly to program their Storm Shadow and Scalp EG missiles. I don't know if it's true, but since the accusation is a flagrant abuse of intelligence, the odds are there's some truth to what's behind what he said. And Polish farmers are once again at it. We'll just keep this time on the border with Lithuania and the Polish-German crossing. They're really aggressive about everything. You notice that they're not protesting or blocking the border with Belarus. Just saying. Just saying. All right, so brief pause so I can get a drink of water and let my voice kind of calm down for a little bit. Maybe just okay, you guys, the Rouge comments are pretty hilarious. I love it. Okay, let's see. I think I've got this all set up here. Let's go ahead and see if I don't know that I did. Hold on. I believe I've set up a video of Ronald Reagan speaking. It's about 4 minutes long. It's one I've used before, but this will give me a moment to kind of let my voice calm down a bit and get a drink of water. Let's see if I can pull that up. Bear with me.
We cannot buy our security, our freedom from the threat of the bomb, by committing an immorality so great as saying to 1 billion human beings now enslaved behind the Iron Curtain, give up your dreams of freedom, because to save our own skins, we're willing to make a deal with your slave masters. Alexander Hamilton said, a nation which can prefer disgrace to danger is prepared for a master and deserves one. Now let's set the record straight. There's no argument over the choice between peace and war. But there's only one guaranteed way you can have peace, and you can have it in the next second: surrender. Admittedly, there's a risk in any course we follow other than this, but every lesson of history tells us that the greater risk lies in appeasement. And this is the specter our well-meaning liberal friends refuse to face, that their policy of accommodation is appeasement. And it gives no choice between peace and war, only between fight or surrender. If we continue to accommodate, continue to back and retreat, eventually we have to face the final demand, the ultimatum. And what then? Well, Nikita Khrushchev has told his people he knows what our answer will be. He has told them that we're retreating under the pressure of the Cold War, and someday, when the time comes to deliver the final ultimatum, our surrender will be voluntary, because by that time, we will have been weakened from within spiritually, morally, and economically. He believes this because from our side he's heard voices pleading for peace at any price, or better read than dead, or as one commentator put it, he'd rather live on his knees than die on his feet. And therein lies the road to war, because those voices don't speak for the rest of us. You and I know and do not believe that life is so dear and peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery. If nothing in life is worth dying for, when did this begin? Just in the face of this enemy? Or should Moses have told the children of Israel to live in slavery under the Pharaohs? Should Christ have refused the cross? Should the patriots at Concord Bridge have thrown down their guns and refused to fire the shot heard round the world? The martyrs of history were not fools. And our honored dead, who gave their lives to stop the advance of the Nazis, didn't die in vain. Where then is the road to peace? Well, it's a simple answer after all. You and I have the courage to say to our enemies, there is a price we will not pay. There is a point beyond which they must not advance. This is the meaning, in the phrase of Barry Goldwater, peace through strength. Winston Churchill said the destiny of man is not measured by material computations. When great forces are on the move in the world, we learn we're spirits, not animals. And he said there's something going on in time and space and beyond time and space, which, whether we like it or not, spells duty. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness. We will keep in mind and remember that Barry Goldwater has faith in us. He has faith that you and I have the ability and the dignity and the right to make our own decisions and determine our own destiny. Thank you very much.
All right, I'm back. Thank you very much for bearing with me for that 4 minutes. I think it was probably better said than anything I could say, that is for sure. So I'm not going to address the ruse, but Lucille does say, do you believe these are the everyday farmers in Poland? It's got to be agitated by Russian interlopers. And I will say straight up, I believe it's a combination of both. We're seeing much the same thing happening in the U.S., that a group of agitators are whipping up the common man, the average individual. Through lies and manipulation and propaganda, they're creating the radicalization that they seek amongst normal, everyday people. So, yeah, there's probably a large percentage that are everyday, normal farmers agitated by a small group of vocal, aggressive propagandists. So that's my thoughts as well. And Lucille, that's also why I chose that clip from Ronald Reagan. It's a great reminder of peace through strength, something that absolutely seems to be lacking today on both sides, I might add, over in the United States. Peace through strength. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the front lines. Also, thanks again for bearing with me. I will try to keep those little breaks shorter in the future. Front lines, the big changes as far as lines go that we've noted here is mainly around Avdiivka. Things are getting a little bit more difficult. There's been some changes, particularly near Bichi, which is right up here. And so it's just messy. It's messy overall. However, there were some explosions in occupied Crimea where they hit on a military base in Howitzers. Not all of the Russian words are easy. I'm just going to state. So I'm working on it. But a lot of air defense working in those areas. The Russians did report that there was an attempted attack on the Crimean Bridge using a combination of British Storm Shadows and American decoy missiles, and they claim at least 12 missiles have been shot down. I'm just going to clarify this, I've not seen this reported in any other source than MASH at this point in time. Null Reports is reporting on the MASH source, so I can't vouch for the accuracy here. Just understand that's the report that the Russians are making. There's some intense fighting around Krna Harka. Let me see if I can get you Krna Harka right here. I think this is half the problem is that they're the same names of cities all over the place. Is that it? Is that it? Is that it? Okay, this is the Krna Harka. See, there's a Krna Harka here, and there's a Krna Harka here. They're literally 25 kilometers apart. Yeah. So anyway, there was intense fighting. There's reports that the Russians had gotten into Krna Harka itself right here. It's not a large, I take it back. Krna Harka is actually a pretty decent sized town. You can see it's pretty dense here. A lot of streets all close together. So clearly there's some things going on here, but the Russians attempted to get into Krna Harka, and the 3rd Assault Brigade, I believe it is, said they kicked them clean back out of Krna Harka itself, with, I believe, the rest of it being reported that there was additional fighting going on the outskirts. Considering the overall situation, this could be a tough fight, but this is another decent-sized little town that will probably be falling into Russian hands if additional support's not going to be coming anytime soon. Russia's been making a series of assaults towards Chasiv Yar outside of Bakhmut. This is with fighting ongoing in Ivanivska and Bodanivka. It's, again, Russians are taking advantage of the situation for as much as they can. They want to gain as much as they can before the presidential elections. Speaking of elections, if you're in Missouri, the caucus is tomorrow, and I believe Super Tuesday, where a whole bunch of states have their elections, is just next week, as I recall. Here's the details on Bichi, which is just outside of Bakhmut. You can see that there's been some additional progress by from the Russian side. Odds are that Ukraine's not going to be able to hold on to these areas much longer. Let's move over to Kinky. It's been a while since we've talked about Kinky, and let's kind of get you the update on what that looks like right now. Get rid of that. Let's go back to the default map. Kinky, of course, is right off the Dnipro River, right over in this area right here, northeast of the Antonovsky Bridge. Well, there's been some updates on Kinky. The Russians have been reported to use human wave attacks in Kinky. In fact, they even claimed that they had wiped the Ukrainians out of Kinky entirely, but that does not appear to be accurate, as the Ukrainians have managed to actually push farther west towards Kozachi Laheri, or Cossack camps. So Ukraine is gaining more territory here. They may have lost a little bit towards the east side here. That may have been about 2 weeks ago. But overall, yeah, the Ukrainians are still here, and they're still working, and they're still gaining territory, a little bit at a time. Then, of course, we go over to the situation around Robota. Let's show you that on the map, kind of a comparison, because that map is teeny tiny and hard to see. Here's the situation that Deep State map is reporting on for the situation near Robota here. That's Robota on the left side right there. But from Supernova Plus, he provided this map, which I believe is a French map, but I'm not absolutely sure on that. But anyway, this map here shows an update on the situation there, where Ukraine has managed to kind of stabilize the lines and push the Russians back to a certain extent. Russians are still attempting to assault into Robota, but the last report I have is that they have not managed to push into the city or village itself. And that's everything on the front lines for today. Let's go ahead and move over to the extras, since I had that nice break earlier here. I'm going to play this for you.
What do you think of Putin saying that justification for continuing the war is denazification?
I thought it was one of the dumbest things I'd ever heard. I didn't even understand what it meant. Denazification?
It literally means what it sounds like.
You know, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on this. I hate that whole conversation because it's not real. It's just ad hominem. It's a way of associating someone with an evil regime that doesn't exist anymore. But in point of fact, Nazism, whatever it was, is inseparable from the German nation. It was a nationalist movement in Germany. There were no other Nazis, right? I'm merely saying there isn't a Nazi movement in 2024. It's a way of calling people evil. Okay, Putin doesn't like nationalist Ukrainians. Putin hates nationalism in general, which is interesting. And of course he does. He's got 80 whatever republics, and he's afraid of nationalist movements. He fought a war in Chechnya over this. But calling them Nazis, it's like, I thought it was childish.
What do you think?
So I just wanted to share that with you because, I mean, obviously Tucker Carlson had that very, not well-received interview with Vladimir Putin, and yet he still did some very glowing, puff pieces talking up Russia's, subways and cities and supermarkets. But it also shows that, to a certain extent, Tucker Carlson has not paid attention to history. That there are other Nazi movements, neo-Nazi movements even, that we see in various nations. There's a strong one in Russia, in fact. The Wagner Group was founded based on Nazi ideology. In fact, it used a lot of Nazi symbols in their actions and in their attitudes. So to say that there is no Nazis outside of Germany is historically unsupportable. However, he does make the point that it's one of the dumbest things he ever heard. And that's because it is. Ukraine is not chock full of Nazis. There's, in fact, people say, well, I was in Ukraine. Wasn't any Nazis anywhere I could see. But much like anything else, there was probably a few Nazis somewhere. And now I've said Nazi enough times that I'm sure that YouTube's going to be really ticked off at me. But overall, the idea that Ukraine is flooded with Nazis, and Russia, who has entire special military units that are Nazi, that have used Nazi iconography and Nazi ideology, is just absurd. So you could literally say to Vladimir Putin, your goal of denazification is actually complete. You can leave now. But it won't work, because that's just an excuse. And as Tucker Carlson said, it was the dumbest thing ever because it was just an excuse. And then there's this guy right here.
Звідки приїхав?
Я далека.
See, I don't think this is in English. Hang on a second. In fact, nope, I know it's not. So let me pause this and bring it back, and I'm going to go ahead and mute that so that I can just read the subtitles to you. This guy basically rode his bicycle 30 kilometers or more to get from Orozhina, Donetsk over to Ukraine-controlled territory because Russia destroyed his home and his hometown. Where did you come from? From far away. Why did you come to a place that is being shelled? Where I was, everything was destroyed. Avdiivka? No. Orozhina? You know? I was under occupation. I couldn't leave. The only free road was to Mariupol, to Russia. Did you want to go to Ukraine? Of course I wanted to go to Ukraine. Are you a supporter of Ukraine? I missed that. You have no sympathy for Russia? What kind of sympathy can we talk about? They have done nothing good to me. They've destroyed everything from our homes, from our houses. Our houses burned down. My relative's house burned down. They burned everything to the ground. Staromayorsk, Orozhina. There are craters everywhere, and that's it. I rode a bicycle from Orozhina. Yes, but I had to get to Kharkova, 55 kilometers away. I rode more than 30, then I was picked up. How old are you? I am 64 years old. And how long did it take you to travel 30 kilometers? About 5 hours. They're getting on bicycles and riding across front lines and war zones to get away from Russia. The Poles said they would eat grass if they had to get rid of Russia. People who have been under the boot of Russian authority. Let's just say they're giving up 1-star reviews on Yelp. And that's everything for today. Thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate you guys being here. Loved the commentary today. I was not paying attention to Speaker Johnson's ruse, but, now I'm going to have to watch and see what pictures I've seen of him and see where that came from. Overall, though, I want you to know how much I appreciate you for joining me and for being part of this small but growing community that is paying attention to the world around us, seeing what the evils of the world are, and just knowing and just watching how things are turning out and trying to warn others. If you found today's video helpful, hit me with that old thumbs up. And if you know somebody who really could use some of the news around what's going on in Ukraine, absolutely share the channel with them and share some links, because I really believe that when all is said and done, we will look back at this era and wonder how in the world we were so deceived. How in the world we let Russia go as far as they did and just never did anything about it. Being the Chamberlains, not the Chamberlains, yeah. The ones who who declared peace in our time. And that's it for today. Again, thank you. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.
We cannot buy